Good morning. Dan mentioned a little while ago, probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were coming up on my favorite holiday, Thanksgiving, and it's always been one of my favorites. I guess partly it hasn't become quite so commercialized. So you know, I am one of those guys. One of my colleagues says, "Okay, let me ask you, when's the earliest I can play Christmas music?" And I said, "Absolutely not before Thanksgiving." So I'm kind of in that camp. I'm sure that after this Thursday, I'm going to hear a lot of it. But anyway, I love Thanksgiving because I think that it really does hone our minds on things that are really important. It tells us to be thankful. It encourages us to be thankful. It's something to be thinking about, and also I think that it's something that can remind us of how we might improve in our thankfulness. So I'm just excited about Thanksgiving. We have in Luke 14, that's where we are going to be today, and we're going to talk about a banquet. And as we start there are some things going on that I think we need to understand. Jesus, he is invited to the house of a prominent Pharisee. He healed somebody on the Sabbath, maybe breaking some rules there. He talks about that. He also notices that there are certain guests at the table who come and try to find the best place at the table, moving themselves up. Jesus says, look, you need to make sure that when you go to a banquet that you don't choose the places of honor, that you need to kind of hold back, and that way if the host wants to move you up, you will be honored in front of everyone instead of being humiliated if you have taken the wrong place. You don't want to do that. And he says, don't invite your friends, your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back and you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. And then somebody at the table says, blessed is the man who will eat at the feast of the kingdom of God. And then Jesus replies with a parable. And as we take a look at this, I want us to understand that there are certain things going on here in this particular society that are important for us to understand, if we're going to understand what exactly Jesus is getting at. And one of the things that Luke really does, if you remember from my studies of Luke way back in the 2010 sometime, is that Luke is really interested in making sure that we understand that the gospel really is for all, as Brendan was singing today. He just did that. We just connected that way. It really is for all. And really, what we see in Luke is that Jesus reaches out to the absolute lowest in society, the lowly, those who are the most humble. He is around these people constantly trying to break these social barriers so that they understand this. However, what we see here is people are gathering with like people. When people were invited to somebody's house, it was usually people of the same social status, people of the same way of thinking. And so we see this in society even today in a lot of ways. You're invited to people's house when they're kind of like you. We don't necessarily invite people to our house who are not like us. We're not in the habit of doing that. What I love about the church, though, is that we have a fellowship that tries to make sure that we are all part of one family. And so we are united by Christ in one family and can break that out. And this is really what is going on here. People of like status gather with people of like status. But we see that Jesus here, unlike so many other places in Luke, Jesus is at a dinner with a prominent Pharisee. And as I think about that, and I think about Jesus being invited to this, what does this say about Jesus? Well, it says that he was respected. It shows that people looked at him as being a teacher. I'm not exactly sure what this Pharisee's game was. I'm not exactly sure why he invited Jesus. Because as I take a look at Jesus, and there is somebody in the house with them that's got dropsy, which is kind of like edema. You might have seen that when legs or arms get swollen or something like that. That's what this disease is. Well, that would not necessarily have been socially acceptable. Maybe this was somebody who just kind of came into the house because they knew Jesus was there. It would have been kind of a social faux pas at the time. But Jesus heals this guy. And maybe this Pharisee is saying, I really want to know who this Jesus is. People are looking at him. People are interested in him. They're trying to figure out who Jesus is. And his Pharisees are also trying to figure this out. They want to know what's going on. But so he is invited. And at least I think that what that says is that Jesus is afforded a certain amount of respect. But when we get into the next few verses and we see what Jesus says to this man who says, blessed is the man who waits the feast of the kingdom of God, Jesus has a story to tell. And this is his story as we take a look at Luke 14:16 and following. A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servants to tell those who had been invited, come, for everything is now ready. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, I have just bought a field and I must go and see it. Please excuse me. Another said, I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me. Still another said, I just got married and I can't come. The servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. Sir, the servant said, what you ordered has been done, but there is still room. Then the master told the servant, go out into the roads and country lanes and make them come in so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those men who were invited will get a taste of my banquet. And so as we take a look at this and we see what is going on here, I want us to understand some things that are going on. Jesus, when he is talking about this banquet, he's saying, I want you to understand something. I want you to understand that you are not to be seeking positions of status. That's what he is talking about in these first few verses. If the host, if you are inviting people who are like you, then you are seeking positions of status. But you don't want to be like that. I want you to break societal barriers, like this man is breaking societal barriers. You've got to understand, you've got to make sure that you are looking to break those and make sure that everyone is part of what is going on here. This is what Jesus is requiring. And particularly, you need to be looking out for those who are in need. You need to make sure that you are reaching out to those who are really not of a kind that can pay you back. This is important for you to understand. But when we talk about the parable part, we find that this really truly is quite a strange banquet. The question here is not, are you coming? When he sends a servant out to let them know that the banquet is ready, he is saying, come, for everything is now ready. What we got here is, it's not a question of, are you coming? The question was already answered, yes. This is the type of banquet that would have required an RSVP. This is a huge, huge gathering. This is just not a few people over for dinner. This is a huge banquet. And so in order to prepare that banquet, the master would have said, okay, well, what I want to make sure of, the one holding the banquet said, I want to make sure that I've got enough food to feed the people that I've invited. And if someone says that they can't come, then I will make sure that we're less that amount of food. Because I don't want to overextend myself. I don't want to make more food than what we need. So this would have required an RSVP. What we have is 3 examples of people making excuses, but I want us to see that really what we've got going on here is we have a wholesale shunning of this person who is holding this banquet. He got a lot of RSVPs. But what is going on here is somehow these people have decided that they're not going to this banquet, for somehow this guy is not worthy of them to go into his house. They don't want to have anything to do with him anymore. And so the one says, I've just bought a field and I must go and see it. If we take a look at this, the hearers would have heard this and they said, well, who in the world would ever buy a field and not take a look at it? Well, I'll tell you who would do that. Someone who is very wealthy. Someone who would say, okay, I got other people to go and buy my fields for me. I've got other people to buy my property for me. And so this man, he's making an excuse. He didn't need to do that. He's a man of status. He is a very wealthy person, which meant that the person who invited him is also a person of status. And that this man had RSVP'd to this other man's banquet would have also showed that there is an equal status here. I just bought 5 yoke of oxen. I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me. This is an enormous investment. 5 yoke of oxen is a lot of oxen. Again, it's status. And then the other one, I just got married. What we see here is people are just throwing any excuse at this servant to bring back to his master as they possibly can. And we have 3 examples here. But really, again, what I want us to see is this would have been an enormous banquet. And no one was coming. No one was coming. So the master, in this particular situation, does what Jesus teaches. You know what I'm going to do? I got all this food. I got a party. And I'm bringing in everybody to take care of this. I'll show them. I'm going to make sure that this really is a gathering place where people can enjoy themselves. And so he says, I want you to go ahead and into the streets and the alleys of the town, and I want you to bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. These people are certainly not of the same status as the master of this banquet, as the master of this house. And the servant says, what you ordered has been done. Imagine what we've got is, we've got a person who is saying, going into these streets and says, hey, there's free food at this guy's house. People come when there is free food. I come. So you have a lot of people who are going in, and still there is room. So what we see here is that this is an enormous, enormous banquet. There's still room, and the master says, go out into the roads and the country lanes and make them come in. Don't even stick around in the town. Go everywhere. Hey, there's a banquet going on. Come on in. And so what we see here is we see that this master is coming to God's way of thinking, God's way of doing. And I think that it is important for us to note here going on, because a lot of people have taken this, well, what we're talking about is we're talking about the banquet of the kingdom of heaven and all this kind of stuff, but that's not really what we've got going on here. What we have in here is a description of a person who has been converted to Jesus' way of thinking. We want to make sure that we are doing things God's way. And so this man, in a very, very cruel way, has come to understand that this status thing doesn't work. And so he had to rethink. He had to redo his way of thinking. Now, I want us to understand some things as we take a look at this, because we might look at this and say, well, what in the world does this have to do with Thanksgiving? Well, it was a banquet. But I think that there's something going on here, because we can take a look at this and we can say, okay, this is the way that this man did this. This is the way that this man was thinking. But let's think about this and think about how God looks at us, how God prepares his banquet, how God looks at all of this. And we have banquet themes throughout the scriptures. We understand that. But what we see is that God never discriminates. Never. All are welcome. You can come. Absolutely. It's not a matter of entitlement either. None of us are entitled to his invitation. And I think that this is also important for us to understand as we take a look at this. We have people here who are refusing to come to this man's banquet. And we have people in society who will say, well, I understand that God's doing this. I understand that this is what you are saying that God is doing, but I'm not going to come to that banquet. I'm not all that interested in what God has to do. And when we do that, we're doing much like what these people did who rejected the invitation. It's kind of like, I don't care who God is. I don't care what God is. I don't care what he does. I'm putting my own self up above God. But if we really think about it, we do understand that we are not entitled to his invitation at all. We are the ones who are the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. We are the ones in the country lanes. Can't afford to live in the city. That's who we are. But we also see that what he does in doing this is that we are raised up. Even being asked to come to the banquet of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, is a raising up of our status. I am reminded of what Jesus says in in the first few verses of this. He says, when someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. So the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this man your seat. Then humiliated, you will take the place of least importance. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all your fellow guests. I want us to understand that just being invited raises our status. It gives us status because we are in the presence of the God who invites us. And our acceptance shows our gratitude. These people who made these excuses, they saw no reason to go to this banquet at all. They were completely shunning this guy, and in so doing, they showed their lack of respect to him. They showed their lack of gratitude to him. Us, by accepting God's invitation, are expressing our gratitude, or expressing our thankfulness to him for what he has done for us. Now I think that we can make this shift here. Because as we strive to be more like God, and as we strive to be more like what Jesus is telling us to be here, we need to be very careful to make sure that we also never discriminate. To realize that we are in the same boat as everyone. None of us are entitled to his invitation, but we do this. We need to make sure that we are raising up those who need raising up, recognizing that by doing so, we are carrying on God's work. And we need to make sure that we are showing our gratitude by doing these very things. By making sure that we are taking care of those who are in the most need. And that is what we've got in the church. And that's what we've got in the kingdom of God. If you are not a Christian this day, the opportunity is always yours to become his child. He's inviting you. He is inviting you. He wants you to be his child. He wants you to join in his banquet. He wants you to be a part of his kingdom. And so if this is the decision that you have made today, to give your life to Jesus Christ, by being buried in the waters of baptism and becoming up a new creature, to live, we are dismissed.